Greetings, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Samuel Lukotum. I am a solutions engineer here at CircleCI, and with me is Steve Persh, lead developer advocate at Pantheon. Today, we will be talking about how to automate your Drupal and WordPress workflows using Pantheon and CircleCI. So, to that effect, on the next slide, you will see our agenda, where I'll be giving a brief introduction to the Orbs feature on CircleCI. Then I'll turn it over to Steve for an overview of Pantheon's product and a discussion of how to integrate Pantheon and CircleCI. At the end, we will have some time to go over any questions you may have. And just a quick note on questions. If at any point during the webinar you have any questions, you may submit them using the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom window. Also, this webinar is being recorded, and links to the presentation as well as to the slides will be available shortly after the webinar. With that said, let's dive right in. So for those who are not familiar with the Orbs feature on CircleCI, we describe Orbs as reusable and shareable packages of configuration. Considering that configuration on CircleCI is a YAML file, you can think of Orbs as just chunks of YAML or even entire YAML files that you can templatize and parameterize for use across multiple teams and projects. The benefit being that it makes it easy to keep the shared logic up to date and in sync across multiple users. On the next slide, you will see a sample orb. And what we're trying to demonstrate here is that an orb looks exactly like a CircleCI config file. It contains commands, it can contain executors, and it can contain jobs. The only difference between an orb and a standard config file is that orbs typically have parameters within them that allow you to share that same template across multiple projects. So for some of these orbs, they're pre-written for you by CircleCI, and some of them are written by our technology partners already. So if you look on the next slide, we actually have, this is not an exhaustive list of all the orbs that are currently implemented, but this is just to show the wide variety of orbs and technology partners that we've worked with to develop some of these configs for you already. In addition to these technology partner orbs and CircleCI orbs, there are also orbs out there that are just written by our user community. So if there's anything you're trying to integrate with as part of your projects, it's usually a good idea to look in our orb registry first, because odds are some of that has already been implemented for you. So if you'd like more information about orbs, if you'd like to read some more, or if you'd like to see some documentation, on this slide, we just have links to blog posts, to documentation, as well as to our support community for where you can get more information about orbs. So with that said, I'm going to be turning it over to Steve. Steve, all yours.
Hello, everyone. Steve Persh here, lead developer advocate from Pantheon. I'm very happy to be here on this CircleCI webinar. There's a long history of Pantheon and CircleCI collaborating together, some cross blog posts, a lot of Pantheon examples going back many years have made a lot of use of CircleCI. I think it's a great tool, and I'll talk even more about why that is later on. Happy to be calling in here from our office in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Pantheon HQ is just a mile or two away from CircleCI HQ in downtown San Francisco. So today, I'm going to be talking about a few things. I'll talk about the very first project that I put on Pantheon years ago as a Pantheon customer. That'll be a way of introducing what Pantheon's own platform does for our customers. That'll lead me into talking about a distinction between DevOps, a broad community of software developers, and what we're describing as WebOps, a more narrow focus on websites specifically. That'll lead me into talking about how Pantheon and CircleCI can be used together, and then we'll close it out with a demo showing some of my personal projects that use a GitHub to CircleCI to Pantheon workflow. So this is a spoiler for that demo coming up at the end. We'll see some changes made on GitHub. We'll see Circle respond to those changes, executing a build step, pushing over to Pantheon where a fully functioning Drupal or WordPress site is running. The other main point I'll be emphasizing throughout is that web development is a team sport. We're now calling this team sport of web development WebOps in the Pantheon world, but this is something that I really want to carry through the presentation. And that team sport mentality is something that I really felt on the very first project that I put on Pantheon. So a little bit more about me and my career. I started as a freelance web developer building WordPress and Drupal websites. I built primarily for artists and nonprofits in the city of Chicago. Eventually, I realized I'd be better off working with larger and larger teams so I could focus on the parts that I was most familiar with and I cared about most. The back-end development in Drupal and WordPress, some of the front-end templates, but I realized I should not be the one doing the visual designs on the project. So I enjoyed working with teams. And eventually I ended up at a major Drupal-focused agency in the city of Chicago. And I was a little bit intimidated to be joining that team. Right before I joined that company in 2011, a number of developers at that company had literally written the book on Drupal 7 module development. And 2 years into my job at that company, at the beginning of 2013, I was acting as tech lead for the first time in this particular job. I'd be tech leading a project. We'd be rebuilding a site that existed in Drupal 6, rebuilding it in Drupal 7, and I was going to be tech leading one of these guys. And that made me a little bit nervous. I was not as senior as these other developers, and I thought, it felt a little ridiculous to be tech leading someone who had literally written much of the Drupal theming system. And that was one area I was particularly interested in because being the beginning of 2013 here, this was the beginning of using responsive design in real serious ways. We were now a couple of years into having iPads, more than a few years into having iPhones, and it was becoming the expectation that we'd no longer be doing m.dot subdomains or mobile.dot subdomains to have separate mobile sites. We are going to have one website that will just work on all devices. And this project, where I'm acting as the tech lead for the first time in 2013, this is the first time that I'm working on an end-to-end client project where we will be doing responsive web design. I'd done it for my own personal site, but that was one more reason to be nervous for this particular project. Another reason I was nervous about this particular project was the level of technical complexity. This was a site that was going to be using domain access module in Drupal. It's a module that basically lets one Drupal website pretend to be multiple Drupal websites. You can point one or more domains, usually subdomains, at a single site, and to some degree it pretends to be many sites. To some degree, it pretends to be one site. And that was one more level of complexity that I knew I, as tech lead, would have to address. I was also a little bit nervous because this was the first project that I was staffed on that we were calling an Agile project. A few months prior, we had gone through an Agile certification program. We learned about the wonders of user stories and putting points on user stories and grouping our work into 2-week sprints and doing demos at the end of the 2-week sprint. And all of that sounded amazing. I was confident that it would make the project run more smoothly and we would get better results for our client. But I didn't know for certain at the beginning of the project that that was going to be true. It was one more new thing to be nervous about. Another thing I was nervous about was that this project had a relatively tight timeline. It had a fixed scope, it had a fixed budget. And if it sounds like those constraints are in opposition to the idea that this was an Agile project, well, although I didn't fully appreciate it at the time, it certainly was a contradiction to say we're doing an Agile project. Oh, and by the way, here's a fixed scope and a fixed budget. But those were the constraints that I was working under, and that was one more reason to be nervous. Another reason to be nervous was at the beginning of the project, I didn't know what the production infrastructure was going to be. We didn't know exactly where this site would ultimately be hosted. And there were, at the time, a few dominant forms of Drupal and WordPress hosting. There was the shared hosting model, which perhaps by raw count was the most popular way of hosting Drupal and WordPress websites at the time. Basically throw as many sites as possible onto shared resources, shared database capacity, and it's an economical way of running sites, but it can have a lot of risk. A traffic spike to any one of these sites could crash all of the sites on a shared host. Something that we were never really doing in that particular job, but it was, I suppose, an option. A more common way of running sites in the agency that I was working at the time was the single virtual machine model. Better isolation than shared hosting, certainly less of that noisy neighbor problem, but perhaps difficulty scaling up and down to meet demand of high traffic sites, which is why you might go and build out a custom cluster. Horizontally scalable application containers, a failover replica database, a load balancer sitting in front of everything. certainly a solid way to run a site, but that becomes an entire person's job. And the agency that I was working at, that was not our core competency, and it's not something our client wanted to be responsible for either in perpetuity. Luckily for us, this was around the time that Pantheon was coming into being. So we could avoid this problem of having a million different sites hosted in a million different places. We could take advantage of what Pantheon was bringing, which was the concept that any size Drupal or WordPress site, be it a small site, medium-sized site, or large site, could have the same mental model for how it was being hosted. With a small site here, you could have a load balancer sitting in front, taking in traffic, ideally doing varnish-like reverse proxy caching here, and some traffic flowing into a PHP application container, talking to a database, a file system, and so on. As the site gets bigger, maybe you need more application containers, maybe you need Solr or Redis for more performant caching, more performant searches, things like that. For a very large site, you may need just as many application containers as possible, a failover database, and so on. But for the developers working with the infrastructure, they don't necessarily have to reconceptualize how the site is working at a fundamental level. You can focus on a higher level of value. You can focus on the workflow that the infrastructure is enabling. So this is the workflow that Pantheon had when it came out. It's still the heart of Pantheon's offering. A dev test live workflow. The idea that every Drupal or WordPress site will benefit from having at least 3 environments. Your live environment is the most important environment. That's where you connect up your real domain name. You have content editors signing in, making changes. The general public perhaps is making accounts for your site, commenting on content. The database is always changing in the live environment. Developers are going to need 1 or more development environments. That's a place that you can make code changes. You can try out new modules or plugins, make CSS changes as necessary. At a certain point, those code changes are going to be ready. They're going to be committed to Git, and they're going to move up to a test environment. The test environment is basically where you're simulating the deployment that's about to be made to the live environment. Bring content down from live, code coming up from dev. The test environment is where we validate that we're good to go, and then we can deploy code onto the live environment. The philosophy underlying this way of working, as we describe it now, is what we call WebOps, a set of practices that facilitates collaboration and automates processes to improve the productivity of the whole web team, from developers and designers to content editors, stakeholders, and more. The result is cross-functional web teams empowered to develop, test, and release website changes faster and more reliably. That's how we see WebOps. Perhaps another way of putting it, as I described it in a recent blog post, we think everyone whose job it is to change the website in significant ways, code, visuals, content measurements of success, and so on, needs to think of themselves as on the same team, working towards the same goals. When you have tools that make your job easier, it becomes more possible to work in this cross-functional manner, to move some of the developers' focus from all the implementation details of running the site technologically to thinking in a team mindset, coordinating with developers, content editors, and others. The way Pantheon does this on our core platform level, we can see through a dashboard here. Every single site on Pantheon gets a dashboard that looks like this. And the main thing I want to highlight again is that every single site on Pantheon is getting that dev, test, and live environment. Each one of these environments has their own subdomain or domain name. They each have their own copy of the database, their own copy of code, their own copy of uploaded files. And here in a dev environment, you can, with one click, update Drupal or WordPress core. You might also use that development environment for basically on-server development. Some people will, of course, prefer to always work locally, but sometimes it's just easier, faster to work in a cloud development environment. What we see here is in Drupal 8, you can modify YAML configuration files here in what we call SFTP mode, make a commit. We'll go straight into the master branch of the Git repository that's connected to your Pantheon site. And then when those commits are made in the dev environment, they become available to be deployed to the test environment. So with one button, we can move those code changes that were made directly in dev or simply get pushed up to the Pantheon platform, we can deploy them to the test environment with one button. And Pantheon does a lot more for developers than that. Basically, we're looking for ways that we can simplify all of the common tasks that Drupal and WordPress developers, WebOps teams in general, are hitting over and over again. One of the first features that I wanted as a Pantheon user many years ago was this concept of multi-dev environments. I knew that when I'm working on a team, we have more than one branch in progress at any one time. Maybe those are separate branches named by Jira ticket numbers. Maybe they're separate branches named for the developers working on those features. Maybe you have your own custom branch naming scheme. You can have multiple development environments that we call multi-devs, again, each with their own subdomain, their own copy of the code, database, and files. Work on the code, and at a certain point, it's going to be ready to merge into the dev environment and then on to test and live. Another nicety we rolled in a few years ago, we called our global CDN. Basically, we know websites get better results overall when websites are fast. And one of the best ways to make a website fast these days is by adding a global CDN. Basically, rolling out cached copies of the assets that make up the website to as many places as possible so that those CSS files, those JavaScript files, even the cacheable HTML coming out of Drupal or WordPress gets spread out around the globe. It's as close as possible to the people visiting your website. Here at this level, we can also add in HTTP2. We can add in HTTPS certificates that are auto-renewing through Let's Encrypt. It's one less thing for developers and WebOps teams to worry about because we've baked it in at a platform level. Another recent addition is the idea that behind that global CDN, the database, the primary infrastructure, does need to live somewhere in the world. And for certain projects, there are strong reasons that that database or that data center needs to be in the European Union. It may need to be in Canada to meet the requirements of the Canadian government. You might want to be in the APAC region for any number of reasons. Pantheon is now abstracting away that complexity so that when you create a site, you can just decide where in the world you want that primary infrastructure to be. And again, you don't have to reimagine all of the other developer workflow details because of that one change. Similarly, we recently added an out-of-the-box disaster recovery feature that, again, you can add to your Pantheon site and not rethink the developer workflow. Basically, you may have your site living in one zone, as they're called, in Google Cloud, Zone A perhaps. In Zone B, we'll keep a hot standby, so to speak, a live copy of the database where changes are always staying in sync. We send a small fraction of traffic over to that Zone B so that if there's ever a problem in Zone A, a power outage, a flood, a fire, a highly localized zombie apocalypse, we can instantaneously fail over to Zone B and see no interruption in service for those end visitors to the website. Again, we think this is fitting in with our WebOps philosophy. We want to make the people accountable for driving results through a website. We want to make sure that they can take full control of that site's roadmap and the pace of iteration. And we think by solving these common developer pain points, the pain points really for the whole team, we can make it easier for that team to move their focus up the value chain. I wanted to delineate here a little bit more between DevOps and WebOps. We see WebOps as standing on the shoulders of DevOps, so to speak. Last month, I spoke at DevOps Days, a conference in Minneapolis. There are versions of this conference all over the country, all over the world at this point. So I gave a presentation actually in character as a fake version of Al Gore. It was a fun presentation to do. But what I saw at DevOps Days was a reminder that for the DevOps community in general, there's a high appreciation of complexity. Some software and infrastructure out there is extraordinarily complex. And I think the DevOps community sees itself as stewards of that complexity. For instance, if you're in an organization, in an institution that for any number of reasons wants to have full control of the entire stack, then you do need a DevOps mindset. You need to have a team that is capable of understanding all of the complexity of running a highly scalable Drupal or WordPress site on something like AWS directly. if I were to take this diagram of how best to run Drupal on AWS and give it to myself back in 2013 and say, here you go, here's how you run a highly scalable Drupal site, the 2013 version of me acting as tech lead on that project really wouldn't have wanted to be handed this diagram. I would think that I know I have a limited set of billable hours. I have a long list of user stories that my customer cares about a whole lot. And every single one of these arrows, every single one of these boxes is something that I could mess up. And even if I don't mess it up, it's something that my client doesn't care about all that much directly. They would appreciate if this problem could be abstracted away from them. And even me as the tech lead working on a Drupal website, I don't necessarily want to worry about each of these layers of detail. For the vast majority of Drupal sites, in my opinion, the developers working on the sites don't need this, this level of control. Though way back in 2013, as I was getting more of an appreciation for the level of complexity necessary to run a very large site, and I would talk with other developers about it, they would commonly ask me, have you tried Jenkins? Have you tried this tool that will help you automate the setup of your Drupal and WordPress websites? And Jenkins can do a whole lot more than that as well. And I eventually got around to trying out Jenkins. And it didn't immediately click for me. It felt like it wasn't quite doing the thing that I needed it to do. I felt like instead of solving my problem, it had simply moved my problem and perhaps made my problem bigger. If the thing that I wanted was a way to repeatably create disposable Drupal websites that I could test out my code changes, test out my pull requests, I certainly could do that with Jenkins. But in doing it with Jenkins, I had given myself another very complex application to maintain, another complex application to host, another complex application where I have to ask myself, am I doing this right? It was starting to feel like, well, I'll need a Jenkins to set up my Jenkins so that I know that my Jenkins is set up correctly. I would end up with a huge stack of Jenkins all the way down. And that's not quite what I wanted. It felt like using such a tool would be moving me away from that list of user stories that my paying customer cared about. What I wanted was just something to tell me as clear as possible, red or green, did this commit, did this pull request break anything? And that's why CircleCI really clicked for me when I started to use it. The need for continuous integration, as I saw it, was mainly about verifying that I could build my website and not break it, build it from a Git repository. Basically, in order to get a functioning copy of my website, I would need a fully built code base. And that was probably, again, going to come from a Git repository. Maybe I'm running some NPM commands to download and create my node modules directory. Maybe I'm running composer install in order to get Drupal core or WordPress plugins, things like that. But in some way, shape, or form, I'm going from a Git repository to a fully built code base. One way or another, I'm getting a database and media files. That's probably coming from a backup of my live site. One way or another, I'm getting a fully functioning server environment. Maybe that's just coming from a Pantheon Multidev. Maybe it's Ansible or Chef configuring virtual machines. Maybe it's a Docker file. Some way I'm getting a functioning server from a server definition. These things come together. They give me a functioning copy of my website. That's the thing that I wanted, not an even more complex system that's going to make this possible for me. Once I have that fully built site, I'm going to want to test it. And back in 2013, the type of test that I wanted to automate most was simply code sniffing, checking whether or not the code I'm writing is in compliance with the Drupal coding standards. The Drupal and WordPress community, they're very opinionated about things like indenting and do you have spaces before or after brackets, and how long are your code comments? No longer than 80 characters in order to comply with the coding standards. And this is something that you can check by hand or with your eyes, but it's not at all efficient to do so. It's much better to automate something like this, and that's where CircleCI really shines in my opinion. So let's talk about how Pantheon and CircleCI can be used together. The basic idea, as I see it, is that there's a growing number of developers who simply expect a place like GitHub or Bitbucket or GitLab to be the place where code pushes are going. There's so much tooling built up around those ecosystems. And it's a growing expectation in certainly the Drupal community and to some extent the WordPress community that you're not going to version control Drupal or WordPress core. You certainly don't want to version control the perhaps many hundreds of megabytes that are in your node_modules directory coming from NPM. So those are going to be excluded from GitHub, excluded in your git ignore file. There's a need for some kind of build step, CircleCI perhaps, running composer install, running npm commands to fully build out that code base. We can then push that over to Pantheon, either the Pantheon dev environment or perhaps disposable multi-dev environments that are just created for the length of a pull request. That gets us a fully functioning Drupal or WordPress website that developers can review. They can send over the link for that dev or multi-dev environments to their various stakeholders, verify that the changes present in the pull request are actually meeting the business needs of whoever requested the feature. If this is something that appeals to you, if this is something that you want to try out, I would recommend using the Pantheon command line tool. In one command, you can set up your own version of that workflow, going from GitHub to CircleCI to Pantheon. The command is just terminus build project create. You say the name of the external Git provider that you want to use, the name of the CI provider that you want to use, your Pantheon team or agency name, and then specify if you want WordPress or perhaps Drupal 8 or even Drupal 7, and then a machine name that's going to be used as the GitHub repository name as well as the machine name of the site on Pantheon. With that one command, you'll get all those pieces connected up together, the appropriate private variables set up in CircleCI, SSH keys set up all for you as well. Also included in our examples are a few different types of tests. A popular testing tool in both the Drupal and WordPress communities is called BHAT. It's a behavior-driven testing framework that allows you to write behavioral or system tests. For instance, in one of my particular projects, there's the need for the promotion of in-person theatrical events. And when those events are coming up, when those events are in the future, they're supposed to appear on the homepage. So with BHAT, we can log in to a real website, either the live environment or the Pantheon dev environment, a disposable multi-dev environment for the pull request. We can really log in to that environment as a content administrator. We can make a new event with a date in the future. We can load the events page, verify that it appears in the upcoming events section, load the homepage and verify that it appears there. And when an event is in the past, then it should not appear on the homepage and it should appear in the events page in the past events section. Similarly, a lot of Drupal and WordPress teams really want to know if either a core update or a theme update is going to break anything. And one good way to verify that is just load a representative set of pages and just look, did any pixels move? And that's something that is much better done through automation. So again, included in those examples is CircleCI running a tool called backstopjs. What this is showing here is that for one particular version of WordPress, the search box changed. Didn't necessarily break depending on your definition of break, but this is the kind of change, a change in text, a change in how a button appears, that I as the developer would want to know about as soon as possible. I would rather know about this thanks to CircleCI and thanks to an automated test in the pull request than find out because someone emails me after it goes live asking, why did you break the search box? If you're interested in just dipping your toes in these automation waters, if you're interested in getting started with CI in more of a gradual way, then I would recommend using the Pantheon CircleCI Orb. Again, those examples we have, those allow you to spin up a brand new project with lots of testing included. If what you have right now is a real site on Pantheon with no external continuous integration, this Pantheon CircleCI Orb will take care of just the pushing part, just pushing from a copy of the code base on GitHub through CircleCI onto Pantheon. And you can start to work in that continuous integration style and add the types of automated tests that you want in a more progressive fashion. And I think if I could take this orb back to the Steve in 2013, I'd really appreciate the time savings adding up. For our orb as it exists now, it wouldn't completely revolutionize the way you work, but I think it would add up over the course of a project, saving you a few minutes each day. Those do add up to many billable hours that you can then spend on the features that your clients care about more. And one more thing on just the distinction as we see it between DevOps and WebOps. So I think CircleCI is primarily a DevOps tool, and features like the bring your own container I think are really helpful for teams operating in a DevOps mindset. If you want very granular control over what exactly CircleCI is doing to execute your continuous integration workflow, then there's a good chance you do want to define your own container image. You want to control exactly what is in that container. If, on the other hand, you're operating in more of a WebOps mindset, then I think this Orbs feature that Circle rolled out a few months ago is going to be really, really helpful. Orbs abstract away things like defining your own container. That choice is made in the orb for you. And for the usages of Orbs that I've had so far for myself and for the Pantheon orb, we think this is a value that's really shining through. So let me jump over to the demo at this point. All right, I'm going to switch browsers here, and I'm going to load up my own personal website. So stevevector.com, not very active these days. I do most of my blogging on pantheon.io, but I've got a handful of old blog posts. The thing that I'll be changing here today is this section here, showing when these blog posts were published. So much like a cooking show, I've already started things even before the demo. So what I have here over on GitHub is a new commit. If we look at the most recent commit, we'll see that on the master branch, I have added published on. So this is something that is a commit in the master branch. I want this now moving out through the various Pantheon environments from dev to test to live. And because this change is made already in the master branch, it should already at this point be present in the dev environment. So there we go. We're looking at the dev environment for this particular website, and we see published on date rather than just date. All right, so where is CircleCI fitting in here? So I'll go back to GitHub. I'm going to look for those notification buttons. And what I see here is that the CircleCI workflow that's, again, moving this change from Pantheon's dev to test to live environments is about halfway through. So I'm just going to click approve here to allow the workflow to progress. And I'll describe what's happened so far. So the very first step in the workflow that I've defined, again, for my own blog site, the very first thing that's running is an npm build step. There's a need for some Sass compilation, also running some JavaScript through a bit of Webpack configuration that executes in a node container. That code is then persisted onto the next job. This is the job coming from the Pantheon orb. It is pushing from CircleCI to Pantheon. Because this workflow is running on the master branch, it's pushing straight to that dev environment. If this were running on a pull request, it would be pushing over to a Pantheon Multidev environment. We then get visual regression tests running here, and because the change that I was making was actually a visual change, we should have something to see in this report. So we can see here that there is a visual difference, and Backstop will even give us this scrubber here so that we can see the difference between just date and published on. Now, again, Backstop is going to call visual differences a fail, but you'll notice that that did not cause the overall build to fail. Basically, if you're going to use something like Backstop, it's up to you to decide, do you want a fail as Backstop defines it to always mean a fail in continuous integration, or is this something you expect to be manually reviewed? For me personally, I like to think of visual regression tests as something that require a human being to look at and decide, is this the change I wanted? Yes, this is the change I wanted, so I don't want to interrupt the whole workflow just because of that. All right, I now see that I've gotten another Slack notification. So one of the things that I've added into this continuous integration workflow is the Slack notification orb. This is an orb written by the CircleCI team, and what it's doing in my case is just telling me, hey, could you look at the test version of the website and sign off on a deployment to live? So I'll click that link. Slack is redirecting, and what I should see here is the test environment. Great, it has added published on. And again, the change we're looking for is that on the live version of the site, we still don't have published on, but we do now have it in the dev version of this website, and we do have it in the test version of the website. Okay, so good. Things are looking good so far. I'm going to go back over to Slack, and it was asking me to sign off. So I'll just click this button from Slack, and it'll take me again to the workflow overview. And I'm using here the CircleCI approve concept. This isn't an orb per se. It's just I guess you could call it a custom job type in CircleCI that will pause an execution until a human being manually reviews things. So I've done the manual review. The test environment looks good. I'm going to click approve, and then we'll deploy onto the live environment. All right, while that is running, I wanted to highlight another orb that I've really enjoyed using. So I think over in this other tab, I have a different personal project. This website happens to be a Drupal website, and I've made a small change here in a pull request. For demonstration purposes here, the change itself is kind of innocuous. Really what I want to show here is the overall workflow that executes for any change on this particular Drupal site. So it's a 5-step workflow in this case. I've got one job here that's just executing some unit tests, again, using the Pantheon orb to push over to Pantheon. Again, backstop for visual regression testing. And then after the visual regression tests, there are 2 system or behavioral tests that run in parallel. These are signing into the website, making actual content changes. And this one is coming from an orb. It's an orb, a company called Cypress, and what it does is runs system tests in a JavaScript friendly fashion. It's basically a wrapper around Chrome, as I understand it. And the key detail that I really like, that's got me hooked, is that as we see here, it records videos by default, and it ran pretty quick there. I'll play it again. What's happening here is that we're loading up again a disposable multi-dev environment. We see the subdomain is PR-345, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this was pull request number 345. And what we see here is that Cypress is able to grab some global variables that define a username and password, sign in, create a blog post with a testing title, hit save, and then verify that title that was used on the blog ad form is present here. So not a terribly complex test, but this is validating that we have a Drupal website that loads, we can sign into the website, we can add content, and I think going forward, this will be a type of test that I look at even more. Because I think this video feature is so valuable. I think it's something that's really powerful to be able to show your stakeholders, here's the feature we just built, and here's the automated test that verifies that the feature works to our understanding of done, or to our understanding of what complete is. And your stakeholders can watch the video, and if it's not what they expected, well, then you at least know, and you're not waiting a couple weeks for a bug report to come in. All right, Sam, I've been talking a long time here. I'm curious if we've got questions that have come in. I feel like this is a good pause point.
So we don't have any questions submitted yet, but out of curiosity, I noticed you're using the Slack orb in your console.
Yeah.
and you're probably partial to the Pantheon orb because, hey, you guys wrote it. But out of curiosity, what other orbs do you use on a regular basis, or what other orbs would you say are your favorite or that you recommend to other engineers?
Sure. So this Cypress orb is the orb that really got me convinced that orbs were something that I should be using, because I had seen Cypress. I thought that looks cool. That's something that I should figure out how to use inside of CI. And the fact that there was an orb got me over that barrier of actually using it. I'm not sure if I would have spent probably a lot more time to get Cypress running inside of Circle had there not been an orb. A couple others that I'm expecting to use soon. So here's another one from Circle called Q or concurrency control orb. And what this does is limits the number of workflows that are able to run either, I think, per branch or across a whole project. And the reason this one appeals to me is because sometimes I merge a whole bunch of pull requests at once or in quick succession. And for those two sites that I showed, the workflow that would run on the master branch is going to take a couple of minutes, and it's going to move code changes from the Pantheon dev to test to live environments. And if I reviewed a bunch of pull requests and then I merged 3 pull requests within 2 or 3 minutes, those the resulting builds would kind of end up in a race with one another. So Circle also has the ability to like cancel redundant builds, and I think to some degree that feature handles this case, but also concurrency control. This feature or this orb came to my attention thanks to Rose from the CircleCI team, who is recommending it as something that I might use I might use in the CI pipeline for the Pantheon orb itself. Basically, there's an orb for publishing orbs. I think I've got that loaded up here. Yeah, the orbs tool orb. So basically, if like me, you're interested in writing your own orbs, one of the questions you'll have to answer at some point is, okay, I have this pull request that's going to change the behavior of my own orb. How do I know that this change hasn't broken anything? And the way I answer that question is I rely on basically dev releases of an orb. And right now I manually change some of my testing Drupal and WordPress projects to use that dev release of the orb, and I verify that nothing broke. But if I wanted to fully automate that, I could have basically like a dev or alpha like release channel. And going back to the concurrency control orb, it would allow me to ensure that basically only one thing is trying to publish to, say, the dev or alpha release channel at a time. I wouldn't want to end up in a race condition with multiple pull requests attempting to publish to that dev or alpha release channel.
Cool. Thank you. So we actually have some more questions coming in now.
Oh, great.
How do you get access to a trial environment for Pantheon?
Sure. You can just go to pantheon.io, sign up, and one of the things I like about Pantheon is you can use all the Pantheon tools for free. The point at which you'd have to pay for a site on Pantheon is when you want to connect a real domain name. So you can use the dev test live environments. You can use pretty much, as far as I know, everything I've shown today you could use without paying. It's only when you want to connect a real domain name that you would need to swipe a credit card.
Got it. And also for the CircleCI trial, the same concept applies there too. For open source projects or even for some closed source project, you can sign up for a free trial, which will give you a limited number of containers. However, if you want to scale up your performance to have unlimited containers, then you can talk to our account executive team, and it will enable up to a 2-week trial with unlimited performance on the platform as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's one of the main reasons historically that Pantheon has loved building demos and example implementations with Circle, because we have had a lot of customers over the years who want to do more continuous integration. They're reviewing a huge number of tools. And it's easy for us to say, well, here's an example with Circle, and you can try it out for free. You don't need to make any commitment to try it out. If you like it, then go ahead and pay for more capacity with Circle, but you can at least get running without having to pay.
Right, exactly. And also one concern that I just wanted to point out for some customers is usually when they have like deployment environments like AWS or Heroku or Azure, for instance, there's always the concern of does CircleCI and all these orbs play well in terms of integrating or deploying easily to all of these environments. And I just wanted to point out that as Steve has been talking about the Pantheon orb, we also have orbs for things like AWS and Heroku and DigitalOcean. For AWS, for instance, you can integrate with ECR, S3, and ECS directly from your config file, and all of that is made possible via the orbs feature itself. So the orbs, a lot of it already predefined for you, but if there are any additional functionality that you feel you need, you can also write your own orbs to fill in those gaps as well.
Oh, I hit you because I was sipping water there. So we got another question about have you run performance tests? And in short, yes, at least if we're talking about website performance. One of the features built into the Pantheon platform is New Relic. So for all sites on Pantheon at the performance plan and above, you get New Relic. And one of the things that we have some examples built around is showing deployment logging in New Relic. Basically, one failure case you might want to account for is you push a code changes and it just wrecks performance. And if you tell New Relic through New Relic's API using our examples when the deployments are made, then you can look at your New Relic graphs of the last hour, the last day, and see just on the chart where the deployments were made. And if there's a change in performance that lines up exactly with one of those deployment lines, then that's a very good indication that something in that code deployment is the reason for the performance degradation.
Cool. And also like a bit of a process question for you, Steve. Sure. If let's say you're trying to make hot fixes, for instance, but then you have your master is tied up with code reviews going on or testing, how do you handle that situation?
Sure. So I would say, first of all, try to avoid tying up master with code reviews. So just to be clear here, let me find another tab. So I'm going to jump over to the Pantheon dashboard for that actual blog site of mine. So we have here a list of multi-dev environments. Apparently right now I have a handful of pull requests that I still haven't merged. Pull request 65, 43, 49. I could have many more pull requests in progress. So I'd recommend take advantage of this feature. Don't merge to master until you're ready to go. Now I should say here, like underlying that statement here is a philosophy that feature branches are okay. When I was at DevOps Days last month, I was reminded, oh yeah, there are teams who really don't like feature branches and want to use master as much as possible. I should say Pantheon is well, you certainly can do all master branch development on Pantheon. We made the multi-dev feature because we think that the majority of our customers are okay with feature branches. But if you're not okay with feature branches, I suppose that would complicate things. So it's only when you merge to master that you would then be going through that dev to test to live pipeline. And just on the idea of hot fixes, I should say that underlying all Pantheon sites is a Git repository, and we have documentation on what we call the hotfix workflow. Basically, every time you deploy to a Pantheon test or live environment, a new Git tag is made. The hotfix workflow, as we call it, is basically you just directly make the next numbered tag, Pantheon test 5 or Pantheon live 11, what have you, push that tag, and that's going to automatically trigger deployment to the live environment. So if you ever do need to push something straight to live and skip over all the other environments, you can. just by making the appropriate numbered Git tag.
Got it. Cool. And I also saw, based on your demo, you were using mostly just GitHub for your VCS and code management. Have you tried this orb or integration with Bitbucket yet?
I have tried it, and I validated that it worked. But yes, the vast majority of my personal work and most of Pantheon's work is on GitHub. But a good number of our customers use Bitbucket as well, and I was able to install the orb, do the workflow on Bitbucket as well.
Right, yeah. Okay, cool. So I just wanted to point out to our attendees as well that, yes, a lot of our customers, I feel the majority of our customers use GitHub, but we also support Bitbucket for integration. So if you do use Bitbucket for version control, that's not going to be a problem integrating with CircleCI on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I also see we got a question coming in here about using CI with individual modules and or plugins, and I just wanted to say that you can do that too. So myself and others within Pantheon, we maintain a handful of individual modules. So this is Pantheon Advanced Page Cache. It's a Drupal module that integrates Drupal cache metadata with the Pantheon Global CDN. So it's a relatively small, really glue code module. And in order to validate that it's working, there are some Behat tests that I want to run. Basically, I want to know for any change I might make to this module that the core behavior of I can make content of type page, and when I make that content, lists of page nodes are going to be cleared. I can make articles, lists of articles are going to be cleared. Like, that's what this module exists to do. And the way I validate that that's still working is again, for every single pull request, as well as any commit running on the main branch, I'm going to get a Pantheon Multidev environment that's really testing out that feature. So each one of those modules has a slightly different Circle config. I think one of the reasons I wanted to pull this one up is because it's almost all just here in the Circle config file. For other modules we have, sometimes they're like helper bash scripts, but this one I put almost everything in the Circle config file. So again, Pantheon Advanced Page Cache on GitHub if you want to look more closely on how that works.
Cool, thank you. And just a quick reminder to everyone, yes, we will be providing a recording of the video as well as link to slides afterwards. And also, just wanted to touch base on a question that came in real quick. For the free trial of CircleCI, if you're trialing with only one container, if you have multiple jobs submitted, all that happens is that those jobs will queue and wait for that one container to get freed up. So if you do move to the performance plan, which is our unlimited container plan, that way, whenever you submit a job, you don't have any queuing in your pipeline. So as soon as jobs are ready to be serviced, they get fed into the pipeline and containers will get provisioned automatically to service that volume. And in terms of language support for people who are curious out there, any language that can be built or run in Linux, Windows, or Mac, we can handle that in CircleCI because we do provision virtual machines for all of those three platforms. And we also have a Docker executor available as well. So anything that you can run within Docker, within Linux, Mac, or on Linux, Mac, Windows can all be run on CircleCI as well. Okay, so Steve, were you done with the demo, or did you want to handle some more questions before we wrap up?
I'm done with my demo, and it looks like we've gotten through all the questions.
All right, let me just do a quick check here. Looks like the folks from Clockwork love you, Steve, so thumbs up for you.
Oh, great. Hello, Clockwork team.
And okay, cool. Yeah, I feel like we've touched on most of the questions so far. I do need to read through all of them and see if there's any questions that we haven't answered. I will collect those and we'll email them out. We'll email answers and responses, as well as any relevant documentation to attendees as a follow-up for that. And so with that said, I just wanted to say thank you to you, Steve, and the Pantheon team for the demo, and also for the work you've put into building the orb to enable our community. And to all our attendees, Thank you for joining us, and I wish you all happy building on CircleCI. Thank you.